2 years ago, the price of a loaf of bread quietly jumped by nearly 1/3. Rent soared, airfare followed. For millions, the squeeze never let up, nor did the questions. Why are basics so stubbornly expensive now, and why aren't they coming back down? The answer is not just inflation, it is a deeper economic transformation, and the real story is only beginning. A grocery receipt sits on the kitchen counter, its numbers quietly adding up to more than last week. A shopper stands in the aisle, weighing a carton of eggs in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other, scanning for discounts that seem to vanish as quickly as they appear. The checkout beep is steady, but the total climbs faster than expected. On a city street, a commuter pulls up to the gas pump. The price per gallon glows in red digits above the pump, higher than last month and much higher than a few years ago. She fills the tank halfway, glancing at her phone to check her balance before heading to work. A renter unlocks the mailbox and finds a new notice from the landlord. The rent is going up again. The increase is small, but the pay hasn't changed. He sits at the kitchen table with a calculator, subtracting the new rent from his paycheck, then from his grocery budget, then from everything else. At a small bakery, the owner opens an invoice for flour and electricity. The cost of each bag, each kilowatt hour, has crept up. There is no room left to absorb it. She erases the price of a croissant from the chalkboard and writes a new, higher number. Everyday decisions now carry a weight that wasn't there before. Each receipt, each pump, each rent notice, each invoice, quiet reminders that the ground beneath ordinary life has shifted. The numbers aren't just numbers anymore, they are choices, trade-offs, and silent calculations that shape every day. Across the country, the numbers are plain and hard to ignore. Since 2019, the average rent in the United States has climbed over 20%. In cities like Austin, a 2-bedroom apartment that once listed for $1,200 now demands $1,450 or more, and even smaller towns have seen steep increases. For millions, housing costs now swallow a third or more of monthly income, squeezing out room for anything else. Staple foods tell a similar story. A standard loaf of bread, once $1.50, now sells for well over $2 in many stores. That's a 30% jump in just a few years, driven by higher prices for wheat, fertilizer, and transport. Eggs and milk have followed the same path, adding dollars to every grocery bill week after week. Travel, too, has become a luxury for many. Domestic airfares are up more than 20% since 2019, according to National Labor and Transportation Statistics. The price of a round-trip ticket that once cost $300 can now reach $360 or more, even outside peak seasons. Airlines cite fuel costs, labor shortages, and supply chain delays. But for travelers, the result is simple: fewer trips, more careful planning, and sometimes no trip at all. These are not isolated spikes. They are broad, persistent shifts confirmed by official data. The cost of shelter, food, and movement, essentials of daily life, has risen faster than most paychecks. The scale of the problem is now measured in hard numbers, not just in stories or impressions. For many, the question is no longer if things are more expensive, but how much further these numbers can climb. Central banks once had a powerful tool for keeping prices in check, the ability to raise or lower interest rates, making borrowing cheaper or more expensive. For over a decade, these rates hovered near zero. Governments, companies, and households took on more debt, confident that payments would remain manageable. By 2023, global debt had climbed to nearly 350% of world GDP, according to the Bank for International Settlements. Mortgages, business loans, and sovereign bonds all grew on the back of cheap money. This era ended abruptly. In 2022, inflation surged, and central banks responded by hiking rates to levels not seen since before the financial crisis. The U.S. Federal Reserve lifted its benchmark rate from near zero to over 5% within 18 months. Mortgage rates followed, jumping from under 3% in 2021 to more than 6% by 2024. For a typical household, the monthly payment on a new mortgage rose by hundreds of dollars, even if the price of the home stayed the same. With so much debt already in the system, further rate increases now threaten to tip economies into recession. Governments face higher interest bills, squeezing budgets for healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Households and businesses, already stretched, cut back on spending or investment. Central banks find themselves boxed in. Raising rates risks financial instability, and lowering them again could reignite inflation. The old playbook no longer works as it once did. The weight of accumulated debt limits every move, leaving policymakers with fewer options to bring prices down. This constraint shapes the economic environment that everyone now lives in, from the cost of a home to the price of a loaf of bread. On a March morning in 2021, a container ship called the Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal, blocking one of the world's busiest trade routes. For 6 days, more than 400 ships waited in line. Each delay sent ripples through the global supply chain, slowing deliveries of everything from furniture to electronics. Shipping rates for a standard container from Asia to Europe soared, in some cases tripling overnight. Importers faced new costs of $500 to $1,000 per container, costs that quietly landed on store shelves months later as higher prices for furniture, appliances, and countless everyday goods. The pandemic exposed just how fragile lean supply chains could be. When factories in Asia paused, automakers in Detroit and Stuttgart waited weeks for a single missing chip. Lead times for semiconductors doubled, stretching from 10 weeks to more than 20 weeks. In 2021 alone, the shortage cost the global auto industry $100 billion. The response from executives was swift but expensive: more inventory, more suppliers, and above all, a push to bring production closer to home. Building new semiconductor plants in the United States and Europe promises greater resilience, but at a price. Domestic chip fabrication can cost 15% to 25% more per unit than manufacturing in East Asia. Even with government subsidies, these higher costs are built into the price of every car, phone, and laptop. Onshoring is a kind of insurance policy against future shocks, but it comes with a permanent premium. For consumers, the result is simple. The price tags on goods reflect not just materials and labor, but the cost of making the supply chain harder to break. Shipping, chips, and logistics have all become more expensive to secure. These added costs, once considered temporary, have become part of the new baseline. The drive for resilience means that the era of cheap, frictionless global trade is over, and the higher prices are here to stay. Governments responded to the pandemic with a scale of fiscal stimulus not seen in decades. In the United States and across advanced economies, relief packages reached 15% to 20% of GDP, amounting to trillions of dollars channeled into households, businesses, and public services. This flood of money met a world where supply chains were still fragile, amplifying demand even as factories and ports struggled to keep up. Then, in early 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent shockwaves through global energy and food markets. Natural gas prices in Europe soared to record highs, while oil and wheat costs spiked worldwide. The combined effect pushed household energy bills up by 30% or more in some regions. These shocks were not just temporary disruptions, they forced governments, companies, and consumers to adapt, locking higher costs into the foundation of the global economy. Inflation now settles into a stubborn range, often hovering between 3% and 4%, even as supply shocks fade. For households, the memory of rapid price jumps lingers. People expect the next grocery bill, the next rent notice to be higher, and adjust their choices accordingly. Businesses, too, watch costs climb and preemptively raise prices to protect slim margins. This feedback loop becomes self-reinforcing, as expectations harden and price increases become routine. Yet paychecks rarely keep pace. Real wage growth remains flat or negative in many sectors, trailing behind the rising cost of living. Workers negotiate for higher pay, but companies facing higher input costs are slow to respond. The result is a gap, persistent inflation, but wages that lag behind. What once felt like a temporary spike becomes the new baseline, shaping how families and firms plan for the future. Today, the world's debt surpasses $300 trillion, and core inflation holds firm. As supply chains harden and resources tighten, higher prices aren't a blip, they are the new baseline. The cost of living now reflects deeper shifts. The question is how we adapt to an economy that won't rewind.